Longtime Facebook executive Sheryl Sandberg announcing she will step down from her role as Chief Operating Officer of Meta, marking the end of a 14-year partnership with CEO and founder Mark Zuckerberg. Now, we want to bring in Sarah Fisher, Axios' media reporter, on this. And Sarah, I want to start with a tweet that you sent out this morning saying that Sheryl Sandberg grew Meta's revenue from $272 million in 2008 when she started with the company to $118 billion in 2021. 43,000% growth. A Facebook, or a Meta, I should say, without Sandberg. How worrisome, how challenging could this potentially be for the company, given her track record?
I think it's actually more of a cultural issue. There have been so many teams and people brought in under her scope that without her there, I think there's a sense of lost leadership. But in terms of the advertising machine moving forward, what she's built at this point sort of operates without her. You know, there's a bunch of people, Marnie Levine, the chief business officer, they have a new head of ads who are continuing the momentum of the self-service ad platform, which is how Facebook makes most of its money, and continuing the momentum of advertising around new products. I think the challenge becomes Sheryl Sandberg was the person who innovated to bring advertising to mobile from desktop. And right now, Facebook is in a huge transition phase, moving from mobile phones to what they call the metaverse, you know, anything from virtual reality to augmented reality. And you need a strong leader to guide that transition over to that new medium and to monetize it. And I guess the concern is if it's not going to be Sheryl, I guess it now falls to Marnie Levine, chief business officer. Is Marnie ready to take on such a huge task? And especially taking it on at a time when Facebook is under so much scrutiny. Remember, Facebook bought Instagram. You know, it bought one of its most popular mobile platforms to begin inserting ads onto mobile. They're not going to be able to acquire their way through the metaverse with a lot of the antitrust scrutiny against it. And so they're going to have to be really, really innovative and really take a lot of risks in order to make that jump.
Sarah, nice to see you. Dave Briggs here. The market reaction, a bit surprising. The stock up 5.6% with the news. Is there internal concern at Facebook about her departure? And what does her departure tell us about the direction that Facebook heads from here?
I just think it means that they're going to really double down on this idea of the metaverse. You know, I think Sheryl Sandberg is getting out at a smart time. She's getting out as the company transitions away from her bread and butter, which has been digital and mobile advertising. Internally, you know, they've set up a pretty strong structure of people that are going to take over for the things that she used to oversee. They announced a new COO yesterday who will function in a little bit of a different capacity from what Sheryl did as COO. As I mentioned, they have a new chief business officer. And so I think they're preparing this next level of execs. But I do think that there is some level of concern internally. It's just been a huge force in leadership culturally at the company for so long. For her to be transitioning out is a real signal that the company is moving into its next major phase. And that's always exciting, but also comes with huge challenges.
And Sarah, with Sheryl Sandberg's exit, of course, she has been such a champion of women in the workplace. She has said that women need to be aggressive. They need to demand a seat at the table, something that we haven't necessarily seen, or I guess isn't so common, especially in the technology industry. Talk to us just about how much she has changed the game for women in the business world and specifically in tech.
Oh, it's been massive. I think this is one of Sheryl Sandberg's most important legacies that she left behind. I mean, I focused my story on the business impact that she made, but there's many more stories to be written about the human impact that she made. You know, I think the big thing for Sheryl Sandberg is she proved that women don't have to make these binary choices between having a family and having a life and taking care of themselves and being a powerful leader in Silicon Valley. You know, up until her leadership moment, there weren't a lot of women talking about that trade-off. And she came and brought it to the forefront. She sold a New York Times bestselling book on it and Lean In. And then a few years later, she sold another book about resilience and how not just women, but people should be, you know, taking care of themselves in the wake of really, you know, bleak tragedies. And her voice has moved the conversation. She's put a lot of money into philanthropy around these types of issues. And I think she's inspired other women to speak out, women in leadership on these types of issues. So think about, you know, say what you will about Sheryl Sandberg as a business leader. I think she was a very shrewd business leader, but and her Facebook legacy, but the legacy that she's made on women in Silicon Valley and in the corporate world has been pretty significant.
Sarah, then there's the question of what's next. There are whispers about politics. She mentioned philanthropy in her statement, but some say she's eyeing Dianne Feinstein's Senate seat. Can't help but ask you, the president's 82 when he would run again, and there is no bench for the Democrats. Could she throw her name in the hat for president?
I mean, I hear the same type of rumors that you're hearing. If I had to give you my honest gut, I think Sheryl Sandberg needs a little bit of a reputation cleanse right now. She just went through being demonized at Facebook for the past 5 years. And if she wants to run for higher office, I think she needs to take some time to really figure out what are her priorities. How is she going to rebrand herself as a person who is civic minded and really focused on what's better for society? When she was managing Facebook throughout a lot of drama, one of the challenges was that her reputation became marred as somebody who put sort of profit over people. And she's not going to be able to pivot away from that reputation in time for a 2024 run. I think she'll take some time, focus on philanthropy, focus on the causes she cares about. And if one day she does want to get into government or civics, that could be a good fit, but it's not going to be in the next, I don't think in the next few years.
Well, Sarah, you mentioned reputation, so it's a perfect segue because we also want to talk to you about the Axios and Harris poll that was recently put out. You were gauging the reputation of the most valuable brands in America. And since we're talking about Facebook, about Meta, they actually were at the 97th spot. Some other big tech names like Twitter, TikTok were also towards the end of that list. When you talk about a reputation problem, I guess, what is it with Facebook, with TikTok, with Twitter? What's that common denominator, and what do they need to do to turn that around?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, if you look at all of tech, companies that make stuff like hardware, they're doing fine reputationally. It's the companies that are focused on software, but particularly social media and information technology that are struggling. I think there's a few reasons. One, there's a huge data privacy issue. In the past few years, with things like the Experian data breach, things like the Cambridge Analytica scandal, people are much more wary of the way that their personal data is used for advertising. And that's Facebook's business model, that's TikTok's business model, that's Twitter's. Secondly, there's been a huge sort of upheaval in the US around free speech and what that means for the future of democracy and our elections. Conservatives have particularly made this a platform heading into the midterms, and they used it as a platform in 2020 as well. And so tech companies that focus on sharing information, like a social media platform, they're really caught up in the middle of this debate in America right now because people see them as the ones making big decisions over our conversation. I think that's definitely negatively impacted their reputation because you can't please everyone, of course. And then finally, I think one of the big issues is there's this really weird reckoning right now around capitalism. For the first time, you have fringe right platforms and hosts and media figures saying that capitalism maybe needs to be revisited. And Facebook is a company that really represents the best of capitalism in some ways. They grew massive over many years. And then on the other side of the political aisle, hyper progressive lawmakers and advocates say companies like this shouldn't have so much power. They need to redistribute the wealth. Yeah. And so for those three reasons, I think massive big tech platforms like TikTok, like Facebook, they are just reputationally in a very tough spot right now.
Sarah, speaking of reputation, I'm a former CNN anchor here, so very interested about your reporting under their new leader, Chris Licht, and they have a reputation of watering down the term breaking news. What is their new leader going to do in that regard?
It's a great question. So their new leader, Chris Licht, sent out a memo to staff that Axios obtained this morning that essentially said they're going to be adding breaking news to their sort of standards guide to figure out when's the most appropriate time that you're going to use the breaking news banner on TV. And to your point, the reason they're doing that, Licht says, is because you're losing the impact of real breaking news and you're losing trust with your audience if you're not delivering news that's actually breaking when you put up that banner. And so I think you're just going to start to see them be a little bit more selective about it. And broadly speaking, I think you're going to start to see some shifts at CNN to make the network really hyper-focused on quality, center, middle-of-the-road journalism, as opposed to, any sort of perspective programming or hyperbolic and alarmist content.